Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. Toronto's going through a massive change, and a gentleman that I've interviewed before, Stephen Velasco is his name, has depicted the change in our skyline and in our urban density in a Twitter account that he's got called Future Model Toronto, and a website, stephenvelasco.com, where he visualizes what's going on in the Toronto area, and it's absolutely fascinating the amount of development that he's got going on. Stephen, thanks for joining us. Why did you get into this?
Well, yeah, firstly, thanks again for having me on, Brian. So I've always been interested in development, construction, and cities. Started off by creating paper card models of buildings in the downtown core, and eventually that progressed into some of the 3D models that you see today.
And so these models, I just think, are fascinating because what you do is you lay out, what's there, what's under construction, and what's proposed, and you color code them, which is kind of fun. How do you get the information?
So the information that you see in some of the models is coming from the City of Toronto's development application website. So whenever a developer is proposing to redevelop a site, they have to submit a file with the city. So with that file comes architectural plans and drawings that really illustrate what the developer is proposing and what that will look like.
Recently, you've done a whole depiction that I haven't seen before of Midtown Toronto, and you wrote an article in a magazine or a paper, I guess I saw. Midtown Toronto is going through just an unbelievable amount of development. Walk us through some of the things that are happening in Midtown, if you could.
Sure. So what is happening in Midtown really is a symptom in terms of what is happening throughout the entire city. So for your listeners that are not familiar, Toronto is the fastest growing city in North America by a number of different benchmarks, the most notable one being population growth. And so the biggest driver that is driving demand for development in the city is residential construction. So this is predominantly in the form of condominiums, and oftentimes that is high-rise condominiums. So in Midtown, historically, the main development nodes that people are familiar with are at Yonge and Eglinton, Yonge and Davisville, and Yonge and St. Clair. Of course, each one of those development nodes having a transit stop along TTC Line 1. But in advance of the Eglinton Crosstown opening up, a number of major transit station areas, or MTSAs, have emerged along a section of its route. So these areas will be seeing a significant amount of intensification over the next 3 years as the crosstown opens up.
I'm looking at your website right now, and Yonge and Eglinton, I thought was dense already, but I see, you've got about another 20 or 30 buildings that are either proposed or under construction. How can we possibly have the infrastructure to serve all that?
That is a very good question, and that's a question that a lot of people are answering. So in many cases in these development nodes like Yonge and Eglinton, the buildings are getting much taller and much more slender. You have buildings that are proposed and under construction at the near the intersection that are upwards of 60 stories now. And some of this density is making its way down to Davisville and St. Clair. So these are definitely areas that you want to watch out for in the next several years as buildings really make their way onto the city skyline.
The Yonge and St. Clair area has, a few mid-rise buildings today. And I think there's one building under construction. You've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 new buildings proposed to add to Yonge and St. Clair.
Yeah, so I mean, the tallest building that's currently under construction at Yonge and St. Clair is 1 Delisle. So that's a development from Slate Asset Management. I believe it's a 44-story tower designed by Studio Gang in Chicago. So that building sets a new height precedent for that area. But in the years since that development has been approved, there have been a number of other development applications that have been proposed in the area for buildings that are even taller. So definitely a number of new developments are coming to the Yonge and St. Clair intersection. And the area will definitely be unrecognizable over the next several years.
It's just unbelievable, the kind of development. We're going to take a break for some messages and be back in just 2 minutes with Stephen Velasco talking about some of the incredible development that's taking place in the Toronto area. Stay with us, everybody. Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour, Saga 960. My guest tonight is Stephen Velasco. He has got this absolutely fascinating website and Twitter handle that walks. Are you on the new one? What's it called? Threads as well?
I haven't, but not for Future Model Toronto.
Oh, okay. Anyway, on Twitter, he's got this Future Model Toronto Twitter handle, and then his website, stephenvelasco.com. That what he does is he depicts the future development that's taking place in Toronto, and it's absolutely fascinating. If you haven't had a chance to check it out, I highly recommend it. I noticed that just last week you actually had a whole article on Bayview and Eglinton, which is a site that isn't terribly dense today. It's got one condo on the southwest corner right now, but it's got a huge amount of development taking place, I guess, because of the new Eglinton Crosstown, which people are thinking is going to be just sort of like a subway. Walk us through, if you could, some of the development that is either under construction and or proposed to be built in Eglinton and Bayview.
Yeah, so for those locals who are familiar with the Bayview and Eglinton intersection, it has been a construction site for a number of years, of course, in anticipation of the Leaside Station along the Eglinton Crosstown LRT. Currently, there are a number of apartment buildings that are at or surrounding the intersection, but they're mostly mid-rise buildings. But as a result of rapid transit servicing the area has been designated as a MTSA, or major transit station area. And so what this means is there have been density targets that have been designated for the area. And in the years since, developers have been acquiring a number of properties and have proposed buildings that are much taller than anything that currently exists in the area. The most recent proposal is for what I believe is a 45-story tower toward the northwest corner of the intersection. And there are a number of other 30-story towers that are proposed in the area surrounding the intersection.
There's like 11 towers, and you got 3,400 units going up to 46 stories. And the biggest condo in the area is about 8 stories high right now. You're turning what is a low density, small intersection into a major downtown urban node. Is that correct?
Yeah, and it's one of many throughout the city. So of course, there is a significant demand for housing. And for those listeners who are not familiar with the way that zoning is laid out in the city of Toronto, so historically speaking, 75% of the buildable land area in the city is designated as neighborhoods. So in the past, the only thing that you could really build in these areas was a 3-story single family home. That has changed recently, so that people are now allowed to build multiplexes up to 4 stories, I believe. But in the meantime, due to demands that are currently happening throughout the city, the only way to really build enough housing that is required to accommodate the significant population growth is to build up. So you see that in areas like Bayview and Eglinton, Don Mills and Eglinton, and many other areas throughout the city where there isn't currently a lot of development, but there will be in the coming years.
So you mentioned Don Mills and Eglinton. You've got another interesting depiction of what's going to happen at the terminus of the Ontario line, which would be, I guess, Don Mills and Eglinton, and then also in that whole area by the Don Valley Parkway in Eglinton. Similarly, again, at Laird, 7 buildings. At Sunnybrook Park, you've got about 7 buildings. At Don Mills and Eglinton, looks like 12 buildings, but then Flemington Park, another 10. And then on the east side of the Don Valley Parkway, another 15 buildings. It's incredible, the kind of development that's being proposed to take place.
Yeah, and of course, Don Mills and Eglinton being a very unique part of the city where 2 future rapid transit lines will intersect. So one of them being the Eglinton Crosstown LRT and the second one being the Ontario line.
Can we absorb all this? Can we build the infrastructure for it?
I mean, the infrastructure is being built, and that's in the form of those 2 rapid transit lines. But of course,
what about sewage? What about water?
That's a really good question, and it's something that city planners and engineers are constantly thinking about as large amounts of people and new buildings are populating these areas.
I also noticed that you had a huge amount of development that goes out, going farther east. I'm trying to find the depiction of it, but it's incredible what you've got out the Golden Mile. What's going to be happening there?
So the Golden Mile, as it exists currently, is dominated by strip plazas and industrial uses. But over the next several years, again along the Eglinton Crosstown LRT, there have been dozens of proposals for high-rise and mid-rise buildings that will really transform the neighborhood into another urban center. So another example that you can think about is North York Center up in North York, and how that has really evolved as
okay, well, let's talk about that for a second. I was up there just recently, and the Yonge and Steeles area is a shopping center that is currently at the southwest corner of Yonge and Steeles. There's a proposal to convert it all into development, and then the whole area has a secondary plan that's supposed to be built. You've got 2,500 units proposed within a 700-meter radius of the Yonge and Steeles intersection, which will have a subway station to it, but it doesn't have a subway station to it yet. This is like the city of Winnipeg moving to Yonge and Steeles, isn't it?
Yeah, well, it's actually 2,500 individual stories. So just imagine how many units in each of those stories. So it's
I apologize. It's 2,500 stories.
Correct. So if you can imagine the significant,
so 25 to 35,000 people or units.
I'd imagine so. I don't have those numbers off the top of my head, but
if it's 8 to 10 or more, 8 to 10 or more units per story, that's what you're talking about. That's incredible. Again, do you think we've got the infrastructure? And again, this is proposed even before the subway is extended, is it not?
It is. And, who knows when that subway station will be completed, but oftentimes these developments are planned years in advance. So it's likely that it may be a while before these developments are approved and before we have shovels in the ground, but these towers will come in phases, so it won't be delivered all at once.
I was kind of surprised when I took a look at your depiction of Yonge Street going all the way from the 401 up to Steeles, that there's a huge amount of development that has already taken place sort of in the North York city center area, which would be Yonge and Sheppard, and some buildings proposed and under construction in that area. A few more at sort of north of Yonge and Finch, so north of the subway station that currently exists, but the vast majority at Yonge and Steeles, because I presume of the big shopping center that's there available to be rebuilt, and the future subway station. But it really is kind of interesting. I'm surprised there actually isn't more at Yonge and Sheppard.
Well, the area is quite built up already. So if locals are familiar with how the Yonge Street corridor works, you have a number of high-rise towers immediately bordering Yonge Street. But on either side of the street, as soon as you walk several meters, you're at neighborhoods where you have single family housing. So the amount of buildable land area where you can build a high and build high density development is it's definitely shrinking. So that's why developers are looking north of Finch to where there are still a number of underutilized areas that can be acquired and built up.
Based on what you've depicted, and again, what you depicted is not what you dreamt up. This is based on proposals at the city, correct?
Correct. Yeah. Everything that you see in the images are based off of active development applications in the City of Toronto's development application website.
Based on what I see, Yonge and Steeles could be like Yonge and Eglinton. It's going to be incredibly dense.
Yeah, and for those of you familiar with the stretch of density from Shepherd to Finch, that density is essentially going to double in length when it reaches to Steeles Avenue and beyond.
That's interesting. So all that development that took, years and years with Mel Nassman and a whole bunch of other people trying to build a city center when North York was a separate city, you're saying it's going to be doubled in length and based on what you've depicted in greater height, and so therefore in even more people.
Correct. So the development that you see north of Finch, often these buildings that are being proposed are even taller than the tallest buildings that you see at Yonge and Shepherd.
It's just unbelievable, the amount of development that you're seeing proposed at Yonge and Steeles. It's just incredible. Now, Bayview Village, where's that?
So the Bayview Village neighborhood is centered around the Bayview and Shepherd intersection. So there is a subway station along the Shepherd line at Bayview Station that does service the area. And historically, that subway line has been the least utilized in the city. And also there haven't been a significant number of developments along Shepherd Avenue East. But that has changed in recent years, and that will continue to change as developers propose high-rise and mid-rise towers along sections of Shepherd Avenue East.
I'm surprised that in this one at Bayview Village, you've got actually almost a higher percentage of under construction than I've seen in a lot of the other depictions. So a lot of it's happening right away.
It is, and there are also a number of towers proposed at the Bayview Village Shopping Center. So again, coming back to the notion of a lot of shopping centers throughout the city being converted into mixed-use residential developments, the Bayview Village Shopping Center also has, I believe, 4 or 5 residential towers that are proposed there.
So they look fairly tall. How tall are they? How tall are they? Do you know?
I don't have the exact figures, but there are over 30 floors.
Over 30 floors, 4 of them right at the intersection of Bayview and Shepherd that didn't exist before. It's astounding. And then Don Mills and Shepherd, where the Scarborough Town Center is. What do you got here? You got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 10, 15, 20 towers being proposed.
Yeah, so at Don Mills and Shepherd, there's a terminus station there along the Shepherd line at Don Mills Station, as well as the Fairview Mall Shopping Center. And there are a number of towers that are proposed to replace some of the surface grade parking surrounding the mall. And further along Shepherd Avenue East toward Victoria Park, you see a number of high-rise towers that are being proposed here. And this is without there being a subway stop that's servicing the area. But of course, there are plans in the future to extend the Shepherd line east into Scarborough.
Oh, are there? I didn't know that. Okay, that'd be great. It appears that there's a fair amount of a development that is being proposed out of downtown. So what you've had is an incredible amount of development downtown, but now it's taking place in a lot of more suburban locations. Do you think that's a trend that is happening?
Well, if you look at Toronto's downtown core, there are already a just significant amount of development proposals that are happening there. And as land becomes more expensive and scarce, it does become more difficult to assemble large parcels of land and build build towers of significant height and scale. So you do see a lot of developers looking at areas within the city of Toronto proper that are relatively underdeveloped, especially around rapid transit, and they are going in and building oftentimes master plan communities with 4 or more towers. So it's certainly a trend that I expect to see more of in the city, especially around transit nodes.
I read an article recently about the redevelopment of Cloverdale Mall, which is at the Highway 427 and just south of Dundas, south of Bloor, north of Dundas. And you've got a depiction of not only that development, but what's happening along Dundas, all the way to what we used to call the 6 Points area in downtown Etobicoke, in the middle of Etobicoke. At the Islington, the Kipling GO train station, subway station, and the Islington subway station. And again, in a suburban location where there wasn't a lot of height and density previously, you've got a huge amount of height and density that's being proposed.
Yeah, I mean, Etobicoke is no exception. It's one of many rapidly growing urban centers throughout the city, and it's not just in downtown Etobicoke around the Islington and Kipling subway stations, but even at Humber Bay Shores. There is a significant amount of growth happening in those areas as well.
Yeah, there's just no question. You've got a huge amount of development in Humber Bay, and I guess it has happened over the course of the last decade or so. But the old Christie Bakery site is now going to be under development, and I understand the province is thinking about a GO train station in the middle of it. Is that the case?
Yeah, again, coming to the notion of major transit station areas, it's not just areas surrounding TTC subway stations, but also along GO Transit. So there are a number of existing and planned GO Transit stations that are also seeing, this rapid intensification around rapid transit.
It's just incredible. The city is going to change. Hopefully, it all gets built because we need that housing. We need the housing prices to maybe come down, and we certainly need places where people can live. It is astounding at the amount of development that is proposed and that you've depicted in your website. So thank you for that. I really quite find it intriguing. We're going to take a break for some messages and be back with Stephen Velasco. Future Model TO is his Twitter account. StephenVelasco.com is his website. It's worth going to if you want to take a look at what's going to happen in Toronto in the future. Stay with us, everybody. Fascinating conversation. Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. My guest tonight is Stephen Velasco. I'm talking about his Future Model Toronto Twitter account and his StephenVelasco.com website that depicts what Toronto's going to look like in the future. And what he's done is he's taken some really interesting information that is available through, the City of Toronto Building Department. And he depicts not only the buildings that are there, but buildings that are under construction and buildings that are proposed to show us what our skyline is going to look like in the future. One of the interesting things that, just in addition to the amount of density and height that is being proposed in the future that you depict, Stephen, is where it happens. And we've spent the last couple of minutes talking about sort of Midtown and some of the more suburban locations. But let's take a look at downtown. And one of the interesting things that, I found when I looked at your website is how sort of the current downtown spreads east and west. And the area around, Spadina and Front becomes almost as dense as what I think about as sort of Bay and King, and not with financial office buildings, but with residential condos. And the amount of development north of the Sky Dome of the Rogers Center is astounding. And along King Street is going to be sort of as dense as Yonge Street is today.
And what's unique, as you mentioned, about this development is the majority of it is residential. So historically speaking, in cities throughout North America or even throughout the world, the tallest buildings have been office towers. But in the city of Toronto, the tallest buildings that are being built now, at least, are residential or mixed-use residential development. And the area that you mentioned, I guess you could call it the entertainment district, has certainly become a development hotspot over the past decade and into the next decade. You know, you have one of the more notable projects is Frank Gehry's Forma, which is now under construction. So those are two skyscrapers, and one of them will be a super tall skyscraper.
Where's this going to be?
This is at it's near King and John.
And this is the Frank Gehry building?
Correct. It's a joint development between Great Golf Dream and Westdale Properties.
And this is the Forma West Tower. Is that what you're talking about?
Correct. So the West Tower is a super tall skyscraper. It's actually the second phase of the development, but the shorter East Tower just broke ground last month.
And it's going to be 82 stories?
For the taller tower, yes. And the shorter tower, I believe, will be 71 or 72 floors.
Tell us about some of these other super tall residential skyscrapers, if you could.
So a super tall skyscraper is formally defined as a building that exceeds 300 meters in height, or just over 1,000 feet. There are a number of super tall skyscrapers in cities throughout the world, but none currently exist in Toronto. So the CN Tower is not formally classified as a building, as it doesn't have occupiable floors. The tallest building in Toronto and Canada is actually First Canadian Place. So that's an office tower at Bay and King. But currently there are
how many stories in First Canadian Place?
I believe it's a 72-story office tower.
So this is going to be 1/3 bigger. Unbelievable. Or a quarter bigger.
Yeah, bigger. I mean, office towers traditionally have higher ceiling heights than residential builds, but you are correct that the super tall skyscrapers that are being proposed are taller than anything that currently exists in the city or in the country, actually.
So Sky Tower, you say, is under construction. It's 105 stories. Where is it?
So Sky Tower is located at One Yonge. So those are the lands that were formerly occupied by the Toronto Star. So it's very close to Toronto's waterfront, and that's actually a approved and under construction 5-story tower. But the developer has submitted a proposal for a 10-story height increase. So if approved, that would take its total height to 105 stories, and it would be the first building in Canada to exceed 100 stories.
And that's Pinnacle Developments, I believe, is it not?
Correct.
Can you actually start building a building at 95 stories and after the fact add another 10?
You can, and oftentimes these buildings are designed to accommodate additional floors. In the case of Sky Tower and the One, both of those buildings are super tall skyscrapers that are under construction and have asked for additional stories. So of course, they have consulted with their engineers and architects on how to make that viable should they get approvals for additional floors. And
where's the One?
The One is located on the south west corner of Yonge and Bloor. So there's currently a 76-story residential tower there on the southeast corner called number 1 Bloor, but the One will exceed number 1 Bloor East in height, and recently they actually got approvals. They settled with the city for 91 stories, and that is the version of the building that will be built versus the 85-story previously approved building.
And this is, I think, Mizrahi. Is that correct?
Correct. It's a Mizrahi Developments project, and it was designed by Foster and Partners out of the UK.
We've talked about Former West, which you're saying is the Frank Gehry building that's right by the Roy Thompson Hall across the street, correct?
Yeah, and that development has been in the works for, I believe, over a decade now. It has gone through a number of design revisions, but now that it's under construction, it looks like the development will finally become a reality.
Where's Union Park, 60 stories?
So Union Park is an office or mixed-use development located close to Front and Simcoe. So I believe the project calls for 4 towers. 2 of them are dedicated commercial office buildings, and 2 of them are residential or mixed-use residential buildings.
15 Bloor West is probably close to Bloor and Yonge.
Yeah, and that's a unique project because it's proposed immediately west of the one, and that development is proposed at 94 stories in height.
2 of them right side by side. And then where's 191 Bay?
So 191 Bay is actually located near Bay and King. It's actually, I guess, the 3rd phase of Commerce Court. So the developer has proposed to demolish some of the more low-rise buildings on the south of the Commerce Court site, and they're proposing a 64-story office tower in its place.
So it's office, not residential. It's got to be one of the only office proposed big towers being built.
It is. It's a commercial office tower, but there is a proposed observation deck that will be located close to the top of the building.
Paused it just for a second here. Stephen, you've also got a huge amount of development taking place at the bottom of the Don Valley Parkway, and sort of, I guess, east of the Distillery District. Tell us a little bit about that, if you could.
So the development that's taking place east of the downtown core toward the Don River and the lake, those are areas that will be seeing a significant amount of large-scale redevelopment over the next several years. So if you're looking at the area by the Portlands, near Village Island, we have a number of high-rise and mid-rise development proposals located there. Further west toward Quayside and the area that was formerly known as Sidewalk Labs, there have been a number of mixed-use residential developments that have been proposed there as well. And east of the Don River toward East Harbor, that's another master planned community that will be serviced by rapid transit with the Ontario line. So that's proposed to be a mixed-use district, but there have been a number of commercial office towers that are planned there as well.
You know, this depiction that you've got of downtown and the waterfront with the Ontario line running through it is kind of interesting how the Ontario line really does serve, you know, a lot of this new development that is proposed. Huge development there at the east side of the Don Valley Parkway, just north of Front Street. I presume there's a station proposed right for the middle of it. Do you know?
There is. So the station that will be servicing East Harbor is in fact going to be called East Harbor Station, I believe.
And then it swoops sort of right past the Distillery District. Is that correct?
That's right. So some of the Ontario line will be built below grade using tunnel boring machines. But if I recall correctly, some of the line uses existing rail corridors. So that's part of the reason why the route is designed the way it is.
You know, it's interesting when I take a look at your depiction, there's a huge amount of development along Front Street and a huge amount of development along King Street, but not so much development along Queen Street, but that's where the Ontario line is going. Do you think that you're going to get an expansion up to Queen with the announcement of and then the construction of the Ontario line?
Certainly. So there are I guess a number of developments currently proposed near, I would say, about Queen and Sherbourne, but over the next several years, you know, we are probably going to be seeing more development spring up around areas like Moss Park and other sections of the Ontario line.
One of the other things that is kind of interesting when you take a look at your map is the huge amount of development all along Yonge Street that you don't get along the University line. So up along almost every single one of the Yonge Street subway stations. There's development. You just don't see that along the University line or along the Bloor line. Why is that?
Well, one of the reasons why you see I guess, a significant drop off in development activity north along the university line is because of the area surrounding the University of Toronto and Queens Park. So those are protected areas where developers aren't proposing any sort of high rise or mid rise development. But further south along University Avenue, south of Queens Park Station, there are a number of proposals surrounding University in Dundas. So that area is expected to see a significant amount of intensification over the next several years that will really transform the view corridor looking down University Avenue in either direction.
It's just amazing. Have you added this all up? What does it add to an incremental stories or units or population in the future?
I don't have the numbers. The numbers are far too vast to really wrap my hand around. But Ontario plans on building 1.5 million homes by 2031, and the development that you see in these graphics is really only a portion of that number. So I don't have those exact figures, but the downtown core will definitely look quite a bit different in the next several years.
We're going to take a break and come back in just 2 minutes with Stephen Velasco talking about the future of downtown Toronto. Stay with us, everybody. Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. I'm having an interesting exploration of Toronto's future with Stephen Velasco. He is a smart young man who has developed this 3D model of what's happening in Toronto in the future. And it really is quite fascinating because what he does is he depicts both the buildings that are currently there, as well as the buildings that are under construction and the buildings that are proposed. So we can actually see how Toronto is taking shape. And, I think this is interesting because there's been a lot of controversy about housing affordability, about development, about density, NIMBYism, that people have criticized as being, one of the challenges. And one of the things that I find really fascinating about the work that Stephen has done is that there's no question there's an increase in density, a dramatic increase in density and in height, but only in specific areas. And downtown continues to grow. There's no question. And the skyline along the waterfront and along King Street continue to grow. And then, as we talked about, there's some areas in suburban Toronto that are proposed to grow, and a lot of them, if not all of them, are along transit routes. We talked about how there's this huge amount of development at Yonge and Steeles, where from Yonge north of Finch is going to be just as dense as it is Yonge south of Finch to the 401 in the future. But again, even though you've got all that development, the vast majority of Toronto still stays single-family dwellings in what Stephen's depicted. So the development takes place along Yonge Street, along GO train lines. You've got Cloverdale Mall and 6 Points in the west in Etobicoke. You've got Humber Bay Shores in Etobicoke. You've got the Golden Mile in Scarborough. You've got the Don Valley, Don Mills and Eglinton along the Eglinton Crosstown. You've got Bayview and Eglinton. You've got Mount Pleasant and Eglinton. You've certainly got development at Yonge and Eglinton, Yonge and St. Clair, Yonge and Summerhill, Yonge and Davisville. But it's still the vast majority of Toronto stays single-family homes. And if this is the way that we're going to be able to house, people are talking about a population the size of the city of Montreal moving to Toronto in the next 10 to 15 years. I think this is pretty exciting. It's exciting because it's going to build a wonderful new downtown, and downtowns or urban areas in some of our suburban locations. But at the same time, it doesn't change the character and flavor of the vast majority of Toronto. The vast majority of Toronto still stays single-family homes. So, Stephen, I think you've done a great job in depicting what is currently planned for the city of Toronto, and I congratulate for you, and I find it really interesting. And thank you for for visualizing the future of Toronto. It's really exciting. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Brian.
If people want to follow you, what's the best way? Future Model Toronto on Twitter?
Yeah, so you can give me a follow on Twitter at FutureModelTO or connect with me on LinkedIn.
Stephen Velasco, appreciate you joining us. Thanks very much. And I remind everyone I'm on every Monday through Friday at 6 o'clock on 960 AM. You can stream me online at www.saga960am.ca. All my podcasts and videocasts are available on my website, briancrombie.com. Thanks for joining us, everyone. Really appreciate it. Stephen, as always, appreciate it. Thanks so much.